In this video, we're going to cover shelving. Shelf holes, determining how many shelves a cabinet is going to get, and fixed shelves. So first, let's take a look at our settings, tools, settings, and our shelf holes is what we're going to take a look at first. We do have the feature checked that we are going to use shelf holes. So let's take a look at what we have here for the settings. The layer name is what's used to determine the cutting parameters. It's how you set the tool in the diameter bit and what type of operation you're going to be setting with that. You could watch videos on the nesting and saving tool paths there. The spacing is at 1 1/4 inches. That is the distance between each hole. The depth, this is how deep the hole is going to get cut. The inset from the front and inset from the back are the numbers here. The distance from the top, the bottom, and the diameter. We'll play around with some of these settings and see how they interact. So let's first go ahead and close our settings. And go File, New to clear out anything that we have in the list. I'm going to add a wall cabinet. Select Calculate and Nest. We can now see that our hole spacing is set to 1 1/4 inches. The distance from the front to the back was 2.5, and the front to the first row was 2.5. From the back to the last row, or the back row, was set to be 2. Let's go back into our design or our data entry. And I'm going to make a change, not to our global settings, but changing only to the cabinet that we have entered in here by clicking Change Settings. I'm going to make some modifications just to see how easy it is to go back and forth. So I'm changing that spacing to 3. And let's make a couple other changes just so we could see how they are affected. We could now see that the spacing is set to be 3 inches, and our distance from front and distance from back has also changed. While we are here, also making note that it is only calculating 1 shelf for this 30-inch high cabinet. So let's take a look at how to modify the decision on how many shelves a cabinet is going to get. So closing the nesting, and again, I'm only making the change to the cabinet that is entered into the list, not making the global changes. This is a nice easy way to go back and forth to see if to quickly make changes and without making global changes, just to see if you're getting what you would like to have before making the global change. So again, right clicking, change settings. I'm going to go back into the shelf holes and put those settings back to where they were. And if you are using a drill bank, this spacing does need to be at the 32mm spacing exactly. So 1.25 would not work unless your drill bank is really 1.25 inches. So you would have to enter in the metric equivalent there. So the distance from back, I'm going to change that to 2.5 and 2. Once those are set, we're going to cut shelves. So this is another feature that we have the options set to cut shelves. We do want to have shelving cut for this particular cabinet type. So we are going to take a look at what settings we have for cutting our shelves. So the first setting here is the distance between. This is what is used to determine how many shelves we are going to get. So if we reduce this value, we should get more shelving. So I'm going to reduce that to 8 just to see what happens, and then we'll come back in and change some of the other settings here. And there we have 1, 2, 3 shelves in this case. So let's go back and change that once more. Change settings. And I want to have maybe, really 2 shelving. So I'm going to reduce that or increase that from 8 to 10. And the depth clearance, this is how much shallower in depth of the inside of the cabinet that the shelf will be. So setting the depth clearance to 1 1/4, we could increase that to 2. And the side clearance is how much smaller the shelf will be from the inside dimensions of the cabinet. So 30 thousandths, depending on what type of shelf clip you're using, that may or may not be enough. So with that space set to 10 inches changed, going ahead and saving. And close the settings. Calculating and nest. Now we see we have 2 shelves. That number looks correct. So that is a setting that I think I would want to set for all wall cabinets. Now it looked like that worked out pretty well. So I'm going to go into our tools and into the main settings and kind of make that a permanent change for wall cabinets, and setting the depth or the space between to 10. The clearance and everything else is going to stay just the same. Saving that. Now that is a global setting change to the wall cabinet type. The next option that we want to look at is fixed shelving. So let's start File, New, to enter in a new job, going into Tools, Settings. For a wall cabinet, I want to set the option to add fixed shelves, and since we are doing fixed shelves, we would not need to have the shelf holes or cutting shelves, although we could leave that on by default if we choose to. And we will do, and we can see how we can uncheck that as we enter in a cabinet. So closing the settings again, and this time I'm going to add a cabinet and calculate. We are going to get our 2 regular shelves, and then we have 2 fixed shelves along with the top, bottom, and sides of the cabinet. We do not need to have the 2 shelving or our shelving holes. So we could make that a global change by going into the main settings and changing that, or if it's just this particular cabinet we do not want, we could just uncheck the shelf holes, uncheck cut shelves, add that as a cabinet and calculate, and we will no longer have the adjustable shelving or the shelf holes. We will only have our fixed shelving. We do have the option to add dados in for this fixed shelving and are able to specify exactly where we want to have those fixed shelves. It may be the case that you have a glass door and you want to fix these shelves to a mullion or picture framing window door there. So we are able to specify where we want those dados to be, and taking a look at that, we are going to go File, New, going into our settings. In our fixed shelf settings, we have the option here for the dado width. Since it is at 0, we are not going to get any dados at all. So let's put a width of 3/4 with a depth of 0.375. Clicking Save to save those settings. Closing our settings. Again, I'm going to uncheck the option for cut shelves and the shelf holes, leaving fixed shelves only selected. This is where we have the option to add or more shelving to. The quantity of fixed shelves is based on the height of the cabinet and the quantity of 2, and it is divided up equally between the height. We can increase the distance of shelves. So if we go from 2 to 3, we could see that the math works out to where we still get equally spaced dados, or we could specify exactly where we want to have them. Once you have this entered in the correct number of shelves, go ahead and click Add to the cabinet or Add to the list, then Calculate in Nest. We now have our 1, 2, and 3 fixed shelves, and we have the dados in the location that we've specified them to be. We also have the option for a stopped blind dado. Those were full dados, so let's just make a change to the settings. Fixed shelving, the stop, let's reduce that or give that a value of 1.5. We'll save that and close and renest. We now have the dados that are inset from the front edge with the notch on the dado to allow it to face out to the front of the cabinet. The fixed shelving is matches up and fixed to the front face of the cabinet. That is the basics of shelf holes, cutting shelves, and fixed shelves. In another video, I will describe about how to add a permanent fixed shelf at say a double height door cabinet, say maybe a tall pantry cabinet where it has 2 top doors and 2 bottom doors, and you want to have a fixed shelf at a set location. So that will be in the next video.